and welcome to the DRW interview series. And today we have Jessica Paul from Tucson, from the Community Gardens. Am I saying that correctly?
Community Gardens of Tucson, yeah.
So she is going to be talking to us about, I think it's an amazing project that she's doing. My daughter is participating in it. I'm not going to say what it is. I think Jessica should explain, and she's going to give a brief introduction about herself.
Yeah, so I'm Jessica Paul, and I'm a third generation Tucsonan. I'm also a mom of 2 kids, and I homeschool, and I've worked for the Community Gardens of Tucson for the last 6 years, recently as a gardens educator. And I'm also an Arizona Master Naturalist, pretty newly certified in that, so yeah.
Wow. Okay. So can you explain to me a Master Naturalist? I've heard this term because Jessica and I have been doing some projects behind the scenes collectively. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I really don't know what a Master Naturalist is, and why is this role so important?
Sure, yeah. So the Master Naturalist program is a really awesome program that trains volunteer leaders to go into the community with the knowledge of natural and cultural history. And so the idea is that we are trained in this knowledge, and then we go out and help other organizations, other nonprofits, other organizations that are working in the environment, and just volunteer. But also, we focus a lot on education is a big one. Education in the community, and citizen science, stewardship and conservation, and also diversity, equity, and inclusion are all parts of kind of our overall mission.
Wow. So just listening to that, of course, I have like 100 more questions, but I've heard of the term citizen science. What does that mean?
It's kind of just getting everybody involved in the learning process, especially environmental education, and encouraging them to observe the world around them and make note of it, and then share that also in a number of different platforms that we have, like iNaturalist, and I'm sure you know some of the other ones that I'm blanking on.
I don't.
No? Oh, okay. I don't know. I can't think of it. I'll have to look at it in a second. But like iNaturalist is a website or an app where you can take pictures of your environment and have people help you label them, and also just give scientists an idea of the things that we're seeing with the seasons, and how how the changes in our environment are kind of happening. But citizens are really like an integral part of providing that information to scientists. Did that make sense?
That it makes perfect sense, because there's things that I've seen, especially when I started Outback and really hanging out like in my yard for a solid year outdoors. There's definitely things that I saw, whether in the gardening spaces or the fact that we didn't have a lot of rain this year. But I'm like, I don't know what that means to anyone, but I know for us, the fact that we only pulled weeds one time versus multiple times, because my husband's like, well, why is that a big deal? I'm like, we didn't get a lot of rain this year, and then we've had years where it's like colder, but this summer in southern Arizona was hot. Like for our area to have triple digits multiple times in a summertime, that was strange. So you're saying I could have documented this and helped scientists?
Yeah. All right, let me look up the other one real quick, because I know I have it right here. And so basically that's all it is just people who are outdoors already noticing the changes in their environment and then documenting it. And it's really, it's Nature's Notebook is the other one.
What is it called?
Nature's Notebook.
Nature's Notebook. Okay. I'm going to do these things because I pay attention to this stuff, and I share it with my husband and daughter, and they're just like, I don't know why this is valuable to
And it is very valuable because, if those flowers aren't growing from the monsoons, that's going to affect, the pollinators that we have. And then everything else, kind of just cascades out from there. So all of those things that we notice outside are super important.
Because it's interesting, even the San Pedro River, because we have the repertorium. I'm not saying that right. Forgive me. But yes, we have that in our area. And we went early summer, because I always like to go right at the end of spring going into like right before monsoon. And I'm gonna be honest, it always looks pathetic. It always looks like not even a stream. It just looks like a muddy area. And I know it's a big place for birds and birders. And I'm just thinking, like, did we get the same? I'm sure there's birds like that still migrate to the area, but I wonder if it's the same or if it's different. You know, those are things that I start to randomly think about. But I like to go back. I usually like to go there, I would say 2 or 3 times out of the year, just to look at the seasons and to see what's happening. Because to me, it like kind of determines stuff that's happening that I see in my own space, you know?
Yeah, definitely
I
does.
want to be scientists.
You are a scientist. Well, and I think that's kind of a good segue. I don't know if you want to talk about the gardening classes, but
Yes.
you know, that's a huge part of the thing that I'm trying to teach the kids is to pay attention, just to observe, you know,
Yes.
surroundings.
Absolutely. So please tell us about the program that you're doing. Because again, even we're all having to find a way to connect and do the same things we did before pre-COVID or during the midst of this pandemic. And I know for my 11-year-old who's participating, these things have been talked about in class, but it's just different when you can actually go out into your own like home space and do it and apply it. So I'm just fascinated by it. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little background on the community gardens first, and then
Okay.
I'll transfer into the garden classes. So the Community Gardens of Tucson has been around Tucson for about 30 years, a little over 30 years. And we provide gardening space to community members where it's irrigated. You know, they pay for the land and they can garden in there. So across Tucson, we have 20 gardens and we have about 300 members of the community that garden with us.
Wow.
Yeah, and so about a year ago, I was transitioning from the gardens manager to garden educator. I've been teaching classes to kids in the gardens since I've been with the community garden, but I kind of realized that was what I really mainly wanted to focus on. So about a year ago, I started teaching the gardening classes in public schools with homeschool groups and anybody else who wanted to come and garden in the gardens. And so I was really excited about that program, and then COVID hit. And I wasn't able to be in the gardens with the kids anymore.
Right.
And so it took me a few months to kind of get over the sadness of that and figure out what to do. And then I realized, you know, even though teaching virtual gardening or gardening virtually sounded really hard and it's not super easy, you know, I figured that's the only way I can teach kids right now to garden, and it's worth it, even though it might be an uncomfortable setting for me. So that's when I started creating the virtual garden classes. And so it's open to everybody. And basically you know, it's kind of new, so I'm just starting with the basics so far. A lot of interconnectedness of things for the kids to kind of get this bigger picture of how gardening can affect them and the planet and everything. You know, and I teach them about observation is the first class, soil, seeds, and then sort of the last class is kind of problem solving their garden and them asking me questions and kind of like a big Q&A where I can get in any more information or questions answered to them as possible. So, yeah.
Well, first off, what I love about it is that it's created like accessibility in a way that it's different. You know what I mean? Because where I'm an hour and 15 minutes from where you're at. So for us to be able to do that in person, it would never be able to happen. And our local community garden doesn't offer anything for kids. We only have the one, and it's not a bad thing. I'm just happy we have it. But because you're on Zoom, I'm like, oh my gosh, like my daughter can take a class from Jessica because I've listened to you talk about gardening, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just blown away. But I think it's so important for kids to know just the importance of like their surroundings and why gardening is so important. Because when I say to my 11-year-old, like, you know, you can't grow a noodle, like you have to grow real food, like if you want to survive, essentially. So the fact that you're having that conversation with kids and she's like, the kids are kind of young, but I still think it's important. And of course I would think it's important just because most of the time I've ever gardened, it's always been with really, really young kids. Mm-hmm. but you see this interesting progression with them if you start with them, I don't know, for me, starting in August or September, and by May, like I don't even have to try to get them to like observe their environment. They just do it naturally. I don't know if you've had that experience before.
I have that experience, and that's one of the things I like about working with kids. I do like to work with adults also, but my passion is definitely with kids, and I think it's because you don't find, I don't know, they're just already a little bit more connected to nature. I think they haven't had as long to sort of disconnect maybe. And
Yes.
so, yeah, and they're also, maybe they're closer to the ground. I don't know, they just seem more observant and more excited. And I mean, gardening with kids, you could just see their eyes light up. It's like magic with them, you know, so
Yes.
it's
Yes.
lovely.
So, what is some advice that you could give to a parent that's thought about gardening with kids, or maybe, because I'm sure you've experienced this, maybe you have kids that are in the gardening classes, but parents have no experience with gardening. And now their kids are like, so can we do a garden bed? Like, what would be some advice you could give to parents?
Sure. I think going outside and observing nature with your kids is probably the first step. You know, I tell the kids about observation, and it seems like a really simple thing, but there's a lot of adults who, like, kind of like we were just talking about, you know, they don't necessarily observe or make note of the observations that they're seeing. And so to be a successful gardener, you really want to be observant of your garden and your natural surroundings. And then the second one is compost. I'm all about the compost and soil health. And I think it's just such a big deal for changing our future and our health and our food systems, and showing the kids a waste, turning it into a resource. And then it's a lovely thing. So compost, everybody compost.
Yes. I feel like I kind of obsess about composting slightly. Because I finally tried it in January, and I'm going to tell you how and why. I had another environmental educator that came out to Outback. So this was pre-COVID, and this is a friend slash colleague, and she was just visiting and just kind of checking things out. And I just said to her, I was like, how do I compost? Because she's always talking about it. But I will tell you, I was scared to do it because I thought I was going to do it wrong. And she's like, Dee, it's so easy. Get the compost stew book for kids. And I'm like, okay. So there I was ordering it, changed my life. It gave suggestions for the kids, which was really good for me. And so we made our own compost stew. That's what we did. And it just became a thing. And I know for like after a while, because COVID had hit, I just started saving every plastic container because recycling has gone away in my town. It's coming back anyways. It went away. So I don't know, saving the planet by saving all the plastic from Costco. It was kind of a nightmare. But then I started using all these containers for the composting. Mm-hmm. So I just found other ways to repurpose it. But even in composting, I still had issues with soil in the main garden. And I know I mentioned it to you early on. It's still having issues. And I don't know if it's because there's so much sun that is coming in on that side, or if I just need to have more and more compost. I don't know. What do you do for those of us that maybe we can't build a raised bed? Mm-hmm. How do you get that soil to be richer?
Well, there's a few things you can do. You know, you can find a friend who has maybe some animals like chickens or something and use manure. But I mostly almost exclusively add compost and vermicompost, which is compost from earthworms, to my gardens. Wow. Yeah. I mean,
compost? What is that? I've never even heard of that.
It's just composting with earthworms. And technically the earthworms are just decomposing. So they're eating it and then pooping out nutrients basically. So, and it goes a lot faster than normal composting. Earthworms can eat just so much and process it so fast. And it's a great fertilizer. And of course for me, with working with kids love earthworms. So
yes. Where do you find these worms? Or they just show up?
No, they don't just show up.
So like, how does that work?
You can get them from nurseries, or we have a cool place here called EcoGrow that I'll get earthworms from, or other community gardens that are vermicomposting. the key, I think, is to find a friend who's doing it and ask them for some worms. But here in Arizona, one of the things is the earthworm population will die down in the summer and then peaks back up. But yeah, so I do want to mention, though, you were saying you were saving all your plastic containers. And I think that is actually a really good idea for parents or people who maybe don't have a lot of space, is you can use like yogurt containers or, these old containers to actually garden in. And anything that is a container, I suggest people try to garden in. I have a friend from the Philippines who just shared with me that they garden with like Lay's chip bags that they poke the holes in. Yeah, and it doesn't degrade. So they just garden in these, they roll down the sides and garden in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. See, that's some of the things I would talk about with the kids, because they would be like, well, how come we're throwing this in the recycling or the trash or the compost? And just having that conversation and then showing them, because we did do, briefly in COVID, we did some like milk carton growing of seeds early on in the spring. I was just trying to give parents like different things that they could do with the kids. And so I was just using random things, and I'm like, these are things you can grow something out of. You don't have to go out and buy pots. You don't have to go out and do anything special. Like, you probably have most of the supplies already. And then just getting seeds, So I guess my other question for you, because we've grown some lettuce before and then it'll bolt, but I have no idea how to save the seeds. How do you do that?
Well, different methods for different plants. For the lettuce, you just want to let it go to flower, and eventually it will, once the flowers are done, it will come to like a head, and you'll see the little seeds, just like you would in a packet. And you can put a paper bag over it to hold them if you don't want them to be eaten by birds or blow away. But yeah, there's different methods for different plants on how to save the seeds. Native Seed Search is a really good resource for that. They have information on their website about saving seeds from different plants. But yeah, I love to try and save seeds if I can. And that's actually another thing about the virtual classes that I forgot to mention, is that, well, like, we provided seeds for the classes, a kit of all the things that they would need, including seeds. And we did get a grant from Native Seed Search for that. So.
Wow. See, this is amazing. I could see us having this conversation a little bit more when I have little people around, because I have a lot of thoughts about gardening, especially in the desert. I have a garden group, which I started years ago, and it looks like a deserted island most of the days because it's just one more thing to try to manage. But I do have people that don't live in the desert, and I see all the stuff that they're growing, and I'm like, I'm so jealous. I have a cousin on there, and he has been harvesting all summer long, and I'm like, okay, I shouldn't have invited him to the group. I'm just kidding. Okay, so I want to check to make sure that I had covered all the questions that I wanted to ask you about. I guess one of the things, probably after we do the recording, but some of the recommended resources that we should use to be like citizen scientists, maybe how to become a master naturalist. Like, these are, again, I'm still kind of new to environmental ed, but my lens in it has been in early childhood and with kids. So I'm still learning there's just so many interconnected pieces. Are there any other final thoughts that you want to share? Or how do parents sign up if they want to get in the program?
So if they want to get in the program, they can go to the Community Gardens of Tucson website, and they can email the admin, or they can email me at jessica@communitygardensoftucson.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
Or they can join the Community Gardens Facebook page and message us through there too.
Awesome. This was so great. I'm so glad to know about the Tucson Community Gardens. Sounds like a great resource, even if you don't live in the area. But just knowing that you're an educator and working with young kids and just getting them to observe and doing outdoor gardening, I definitely know, like, we'll have to have more further conversation about this. I just see another series coming out of it. That's what I feel like. But I can't thank you enough for coming on. And if you all are interested, I will definitely make sure that I put all the links in the bio for you all to be able to check out the work that Jessica's doing so you can connect as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the great work you do too.
Thank you.